that we now receive commitment from all major retailers, including Walmart and Costco. They're joining the Grocery Code of Conduct. That's great news for the whole grocery supply. And it will bring more fairness, transparency, and predictability. Together, we agree to support the work of Canada's first sector code of conduct adjudication office. This includes a short-term, one-time funding proposed by industry of $1.2 million. We will continue working with them on the next steps and monitoring their progress, moving forward very carefully. We also spent some time talking about the business risk management programs, including agri-recovery and agri-stability. And I'd like to thank all my counterparts for sharing their perspective about how the programs have been working or how they can work better in the provinces and territories. We agree to look at ways that we can make improvements to our suite of programs and that will support our producers better. We've all seen an increase in climate-related disasters in recent years, and this is vital work going forward. We also keep an eye on animal diseases. This includes our ongoing response to avian influenza in cattle, and I am so relieved that we have no positive cases detected here in Canada. Farming and food security are different in the north, and I'm glad we spent some time hearing from folks about what it was like for them on the ground here in the Yukon and across the territories. So once again, I'd like to thank all my provincial and territorial colleagues for their dedication to our farmers and to the sector. And now it's my privilege to invite John, my colleague, John Streicker, to say a few words.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Minister. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everybody. I will begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the T'an-Quachin Council. Je tiens à souligner aujourd'hui que nous parlons ici sur le territoire traditionnel du Kwanlundun et T'an-Quachin Council. It's been an honor to host the 2024 Federal, Provincial, and Territorial Ministers of Agriculture Conference. We have had many important discussions that will support the increased resilience and competitiveness of the agriculture sector to strengthen the food supply chain across this country. As ministers, we were all very pleased to see the industry announcement and their approval of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct. As a result, ministers endorsed a request of $1.2 million for short-term funding that will help establish an adjudicator's office that will implement this new code of conduct. We look forward to the industry advancing this work to bring more fairness and predictability in the grocery supply chain in the future. Ministers agreed to continue to prioritize work to ensure business risk management programs like the Agri-Recovery Framework are timely and responsive for producers to help manage risks like drought, floods, and fires. This work will strengthen producers' ability to address the risks of climate change. Particularly, ministers want to make adjustments to agri-stability and advance work on proposals at the next ministers' meeting. We agreed to advance the Pesticides Working Group's action plan, including to ensure meaningful participation from other agencies. Ministers emphasized the importance of an evidence-based approach that meets production needs and human and ecosystem health. We support the ongoing work to advance trade agreements around the world, with Canada, United States, Mexico, ag being a priority for our export market, along with Indo-Pacific agriculture and agri-food initiatives. Local producers and food businesses of the Yukon are beginning to consider export as a future growth opportunity and will benefit from this strengthened support. Our federal, provincial, territorial jurisdictions are collaborating to advance readiness if African swine fever were to impact Canada. Part of this readiness in Canada includes international zoning to help containment. Avian influenza, oh, it's twice. Try it a third time. Avian influenza in dairy cattle continues to be monitored. Provincial and territorial governments are supportive of measures at the United States border for imported dairy cattle. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, specified risk, and honeybee package risk assessments are advancing, and ministers are encouraging efforts to accelerate this work. Other topics discussed during this meeting include the high cost of production for producers, the advancing and leveraging of technology, data and scientific research in the agriculture sector, and Northern and Indigenous food production and food security. Overall, it was a very strong couple of days working with colleagues from across the country to support our farmers and the food they produce for Canadians. Right now, I would like to, and I just will acknowledge that Minister Lamontagne from Quebec did a lot of work on the Grocery Code of Conduct, so we've asked him to say a few words too. J'aimerais inviter mon collègue ministre Lamontagne du Québec à dire quelques mots. Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Streicker, Minister MacAulay. No, it's a great day for Canada, for consumers, for the whole supply chain, because we always can say that a supply chain is as strong as its weakest link. And with this code of conduct that will be put in place by the industry, has been designed by the industry, and every partner, every member of this industry subscribe today to this frame of work, that will definitely bring more predictability, transparency, fairness among the chain. And one thing very important also is a mechanism to resolve conflict. So when someone will feel a little bit annoyed by some decision, there will be means for him to resolve those conflicts with other suppliers or grocer. And one thing also that'll be very important, the adjudicator will have the responsibility to come up like on a regular basis with kind of a state of health of our chain of supply for the grocery sector. So on the short and midterm, it's going to be good for our companies, for our people in the investment and innovation. And on the longer term, having a more stable and more fair chain of supply, those who will benefit will be definitely consumers across Canada. So I'm delighted that they could come along to this resolution and to see today that the 5 big retailers in Canada are really engaged in providing Canadian with a strong and fair and transparent food supply. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. So we'll start with questions in the room. If you want to walk up to the microphone over there. One question, one follow-up, and please state your name and the outlet that you're with.
Karen Briere, Western producer. You said you discussed agri-stability and agri-recovery with possible changes coming. Can you give any specifics on what those changes might be?
Well, agri-recovery, of course, is we feel, and the farmers feel too, that when they apply, it's too long a period of time before they receive the funding. Quite simply, when they have a problem, agricultural sector, whether you're a farmer, rancher in this country, when you have a problem, you need the money. So what we're trying to do is to make sure we have to do it properly. There's guidelines to be taken, but we want to make sure we get the money into the pockets of the farmers and ranchers quicker than we have been. And we're working together to see that happens.
I just
go right ahead.
One of the things that we discussed at the table was we anticipate that there can be more climate challenges in the future. So we were trying to talk about how to make this timely, as Minister MacAulay just said, but also predictable. And we we don't think it's productive across the country to have a program have to fire up and be specialized each time. We're looking for something that will be more predictable across the board.
And I'd like to say on agri-stability, the Alberta delegation presented on a cow-calf operation. Like what we're trying to do, in fact, is to agri-stability means that we're taking measures in order to prevent problems. Agri-recovery means we deal with the problem after it happens. And of course, we want to make sure that we spend the dollars as efficiently as we can in order to prevent problems. But of course, agri-recovery needs to be there for the disasters that hit, because if not, the farmer is put out of business and the rancher is put out of business. So we're working really in both angles. Thank you.
You said you also discussed the high cost of production for farmers, but were there any solutions provided to that?
Well, it's never easy to come up with exact solutions. Being a farmer myself, I well realize the cost of fertilizer itself is massive, but you have to have fertilizers. So as you know, there's a program in place, voluntary program to reduce the use of fertilizer, making sure that it does not affect the increase in production that has taken place over the years. We have to make sure that that continues. But, you know, the way fertilizer is manufactured and put together and how the nitrogen dissolves in the soil is so important. What we're trying to do is make sure that we're environmentally sensitive, also making sure that we continue to increase production, because quite simply, if the nitrogen is reduced in a proper manner, it means the plant grows stronger, you have a bigger crop, and that takes nitrogen out of the soil and it takes nitrogen out of the air. So that's some of the things we're trying to do. But yes, equipment is expensive, it's massive. To buy a tractor, a new tractor and something behind it, you're talking $1 million. Big money, no question.
I'll just add a couple of thoughts on top of those. The first one is, ahead of our ministerial meetings, we always meet with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. And they gave us, there was a great panel discussion and conversation around data and using technology to increase productivity. So there are ways that we're looking at the front end. And I just want to emphasize at the back end that what André was just talking about, sorry, Minister Lamontagne was just talking about with respect to the grocery code of conduct. You know, when just today here in the Yukon, or the last couple of days, there was the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition was meeting to talk about high prices. And one of the things they were talking about was prices in our grocery stores. And so Canadians feel that pressure. And one of the places where they sometimes will be worried is whether it's because of our farms and the costs there. But we know that the costs are going up on the farms for production. So if you think of it about how we get food to the table, if we look at that whole supply chain, as André mentioned, and then we look for ways to try and in the future create more fairness around what's happening in our stores, that also is going to help on the pressure that comes back on the farms.
And of course, we're indicating quite clearly this grocery code is not meant. It will not lower prices, but it will create more fairness, and it would be just for the consumer themselves to be able to see that really the trail, you always hear from the gate to the plate. Well, I think it's fair that consumers see what takes place in general, mostly from gate to the plate. But perhaps André might want to comment more on that, on the grocery code itself. He put a lot of effort into this. I came in a year ago as Minister of Agriculture, but as has been said, André has been at this and has done a great job.
It really has to do with making sure that because the whole supply chains, it's hundreds and hundreds of suppliers. Some are very big, some are quite small. And to have a sense of fairness and predictability for each player so that there are no surprises that's come to them that jeopardize their finances, that jeopardize their ability to invest, to innovate. So to have all the big players agreeing to the same way of doing things, that's going to be helpful for the health of each and every one of those little companies. So ça va vraiment permettre d'avoir davantage d'équité et puis aussi de prévisibilité pour les différentes entreprises le long de la chaîne.
Thank you, André. But it's not a magic bullet, but it creates fairness.
Next question.
Liam Baker from CBC Whitehorse. I'm just wondering, what enforcement, you mentioned that all major retailers have signed on to the Grocery Code of Conduct. What enforcement measures are in place to ensure that they keep to the code?
Well, of course, the code itself was put together by industry itself. And I can assure Andre and I over the last year and before that, the great work was what our job was to support them in any way possible, and we did. But it's very important to note that the Grocery Code of Conduct is put together by the industry itself. And that is what we wanted to see happen. It's not legislation, it's not government intervention, it's the industry itself.
And and there'll be an office with the adjudicator and a team that will make sure that what's been signed, that people are acting in a way that they've all agreed to. And when there will be conflict, there will be mechanism with the adjudicator to resolve those conflicts. So, and it will be public, you know, the adjudicator, it's a nonprofit organization, and its role is to make sure that people are playing and acting in the right fashion in accordance with the code of conduct that they will have subscribed to.
And of course, the office means when you have a complaint, you got a place to go.
Sure. And at the current moment, are there any penalties in place if the code is not followed, set out by the retailers in the industry itself?
Well, as we both have said, it's a code that's put together by industry and just being put together as of, we got the word yesterday, I believe it was. So there's many things to work out. I don't know if Andre, but simply there's a lot of things to work out, but it's a wonderful thing to have happened. I think it's important for the country. It's going to create a fairness and transparency. And in fact, that's what we were working, or the industry was working with support from us to make sure this took place. And I can tell you, as a group around the table and for Andre and myself, we're certainly pleased that this took place.
I'll just add, let's acknowledge that the chains themselves signed on and developed this. So that gives us a sense of their intention. We'll see how it goes with the adjudicator, but it's a good sign that the industry themselves came forward and said, yeah, we want to do this and we're willing to do it.
As you're aware, other countries have this, the United Kingdom and Australia, and but this is not legislation. This is, as we said, industry-led. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go virtual now.
Thank you, Annie. A reminder that the virtual question and answer session is reserved for members of the media. Reporters will need to identify their name and affiliation in the chat to ask a question. One question and one follow-up will be permitted. If you experience any issues, please mention it in the chat during the event or reach out to media relations after the call. Un rappel que cette période de questions et réponses est réservée aux médias. Les journalistes doivent inscrire leur nom et affiliation médiatique dans le messagerie chat pour poser une question. Une question et un suivi par médias seront permis. Si vous approuvez des enjeux, merci de le signaler dans le chat pendant l'appel ou d'écrire à l'équipe de médias, relations médias après l'appel.
Annie, there's no questions.
I'll ask you.
So just a reminder to those online. Okay. We have a question from, I believe it's Tim Gilk. You can go ahead, Tim.
Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. So my question is for John Streicker. I'd like him to explain what's coming out of this conference that's going to interest, impress, or concern Yukoners.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Tim. I think there are a couple of things sort of at the large level, and the grocery code of conduct would be one of the biggest ones. And I already sort of described that today. I heard through the media about the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition talking about affordability. And I'll just acknowledge, as Minister MacAulay did, that the grocery code of conduct is not about lowering prices tomorrow. What it's about is in the future that there is transparency and accountability around food prices in our grocery stores. One of the things that happened with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and with the Department of Agriculture is that visitors here to the Yukon got to tour a bunch of our farms and talk to local farmers. And we discussed how the situation is here is not so much about the export of food to the rest of the country, but it's around production. And there were a ton of conversations. There were some at the table themselves, but because we had a panel on northern food production, northern food resiliency, northern food security. But I got into conversations with counterparts from British Columbia, from I think New Brunswick, and from the Northwest Territories, and we started discussing some of the issues that we are facing and how we can exchange best practices across to improve food production here. And there was, I think the minister from Saskatchewan was talking about specific wheat and barley varieties, which do well in a short but intense growing season. Again, would be super helpful for us here in the Yukon. So there's always a great exchange that is happening across the board.
Okay, and one more question for you. I think you just kind of answered it though. So despite the considerable differences in the agricultural industry here in the territory, you find these meetings are still relevant?
So much so. Sorry, just a second. Sorry, excuse me. First of all, many of the ministers that are here, they're actually farmers. It's not always true, but a lot of them are. My colleague from Manitoba, Ron Kostishin, he's just back in the role. He's going to be next year's chair. And so, but the ministers to a person all really care about food production here in Canada, and it's always like there's always hard conversations at the table and a range of views, but it is all, in my experience, super productive. And there are these meetings ahead of time, for example, with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and all of those subgroups and the provincial and territorial bodies. We had the Yukon Agricultural Association represented, in fact, hosting a bunch of the tours. There is a really great exchange. And then we get down into detailed things like pesticide management and how we're going to move forward and improve it in the future for all of those farmers. So I think it is very important. I know that sometimes from the public's perspective, it just looks like a bunch of people wearing ties talking around a table. But my experience has been that it is very productive and very focused on that important notion of supplying food as for Canadians. So it is actually a really productive meeting.
All right. Thank you very
No
much.
more questions for me.
Thank you. Our next question is from Peter Mithun from Country Life in BC.
Yeah, thank you. First question would be, you spoke about, and I believe this is the Yukon Minister spoke about it, a more predictable set of business risk management programs so that they're not always responsive, but maybe more anticipatory of the challenges and the needs of farmers when climate disasters strike. So just curious, in view of the devastating losses British Columbia's fruit growers and grape growers have faced over the past couple of years, and the lack of any agri-recovery request, I guess, or program for them. I was just curious how the changes discussed at this meeting will benefit them now and in future disasters.
Well, thank you very much. And of course, that was base of part of our discussions, in fact, and I'm fully aware of the difficulties that have taken place in British Columbia and other places across the country. And of course, that's you have many different types of problems, like in the berry industry, you got what we're trying to do is work and restore the plants that will stand some frost. And I know the sector is quite interested in making sure that takes place. It is no good replanting what was there because these things can happen again. But what we're trying to do is work with the sectors and make sure that what we do restore will stand a bit more frost. I mean, it's obvious the climate is changing, and what we're trying to do is get these cherry growers, in particular, that's one example. I mean, they need to replant because the plants were destroyed, but also, as I said, to make sure that what's put in place will last. That's part of what we're trying to do. There's many, many examples of disasters across the country with frost, rain, with floods, fires, continual.
It's a drought.
And drought for sure, yes, no question. I thank you. And that's certainly a problem and an issue that we're trying to deal with as ministers and as a government. Thank you.
And just as a follow-up, well, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about the memorandum of understanding that Yukon signed with British Columbia to enhance the farm sectors in both provinces. I think that's been addressed. So I'd be actually curious to know, Minister MacAulay, there's 300 acres in Surrey that the federal government plans to dispose of, and that 3 First Nations have expressed an interest in. That's growing about 50 million servings of produce for British Columbians, Canadians, and would love to hear perspective on how food security dovetails with for the broader population, dovetails with our interest in reconciling with our Indigenous peoples. And,
well, of course.
Whether food security could be sacrificed in these cases.
Well, of course, as you know, there's a mechanism in place for when federal land is dispersed of, and we have to follow the guidelines. But of course, what we want to make sure that anywhere there can be production, we want to make sure it's the best production possible, and that's simply where it is. But there is a process in place with the governments of Canada in order to, when land is dispersed of, so it will be handled on the appropriate manner.
I'll just add a comment. 2 points that I want to add to the thinking on this. First of all, every First Nation that I've worked with, every Indigenous organization cares about food security. So let's acknowledge that there's a lot of shared concern there. And we in that panel, that northern panel that we had here, we had 4 panelists, and 3 of them were from Indigenous communities and Indigenous perspectives. So sometimes, when land goes to First Nations, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be pulled, if it's agricultural land, that it will necessarily be pulled out of production. I have seen First Nations more and more here in the Yukon investing in agriculture and a range of techniques of agriculture. Of course, they also care about, and when we opened this conference, we had Elder Ann Smith give the opening prayer, and she talked a lot, and I think challenged us as ministers to make sure to also think about the animals on the land, the fish, the quality of the water, the air, that what we are doing is going to support the natural environment, because many Indigenous people rely on country food. So but I know that there's a whole program with the federal government around how land is dispersed. And I leave that because that's a whole conversation to happen. But I just think we should tell Canadians about how Indigenous people, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis really care about food security and are thinking about agriculture as well.
I hope I didn't indicate it was not that
No,
way.
gosh, no.
Because no, but I want to be sure that I was on the First Nations in Alberta, Timothy hay operation. I thought I knew about baled hay. Well, the way they compress that hay and the operation they got is second to none in this world. In fact, absolutely no question about that.
Yeah, and sorry, Minister MacAulay, I know you care about this.
Oh, no.
I was thinking it was how the question was framed. It was almost assuming that the land was going to be moved from agriculture. So I just wanted to make sure that we think about that first.
And I had the honor of viewing some very productive operations with many different sectors in this country, and absolutely so. And thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any additional questions, but one final reminder to identify your name and affiliation in the chat if you'd like to ask a question, and rappel d'inscrire votre nom et affiliation médiatique dans la messagerie chat pour poser une question. All right. There are no further questions, so I'll turn things back over to Annie. Il n'y a plus de questions, alors je cède la parole à Annie.
Thank you.
Thank you, boy.
Okay, that marks the end of today's press conference. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Wonderful.